A warehouse in the industrial district of downtown Los Angeles in February 1973 had been converted for the evening into something between a training facility and a private gathering. Boxing rings, wrestling mats, karate areas with traditional flooring, heavy bags hanging from the ceiling, speed bags, equipment distributed throughout a large open space. The event was invitation only. About 200 people circulated through it. Boxers, wrestlers, martial artists, stuntmen, action actors, fight coordinators. The intersection of people who made fight scenes happen professionally and people who understood combat outside of any professional context. Reputations were made at events like this, challenged at events like this, and occasionally dismantled at events like this. The atmosphere was competitive and charged with the specific energy of rooms where everyone present has something to prove to someone. Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris were sitting in the first row of folding chairs watching a demonstration. Two karate fighters sparring, showing technique and speed. Both were dressed casually, jeans and jackets, not trying to announce themselves. They had been friends since filming The Way of the Dragon in Rome the previous year, and they met up when schedules allowed for exactly this kind of evening, watching other martial artists, talking about technique and philosophy, just being part of the community they had both dedicated their lives to. They were talking quietly between themselves when the situation across the warehouse was still just a young man drinking and talking too much. Sylvester Stallone was 26 years old. He had done small film roles, background work, the kind of incremental participation in the industry that keeps a dream technically alive without bringing it appreciably closer to realization. He was in good physical shape. He had been training his body with the specific intentionality of someone who has identified physicality as his competitive advantage, as the thing that might distinguish him from the many other young men with similar ambitions and less obvious assets. He was not the most polished actor in the room, not the most connected, not the most conventionally attractive, but he was muscular and he moved like someone who understood what his body could do. And he had built his strategy for breaking through around action roles, fight roles, the territory where physical credibility mattered as much as anything else. The problem, as he experienced it, was Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee was already occupying the territory Stallone wanted to occupy. Bruce Lee was the action star, the fight star, the person Hollywood called when they wanted someone who could deliver combat on screen with genuine credibility. And Stallone was nobody. Struggling, broke, watching his path forward seemed to narrow further with every film Bruce Lee made. That assessment was not entirely rational, but resentment rarely is, and the alcohol he had consumed that evening was not improving the quality of his reasoning. He had been talking to other struggling actors in the room, people who shared versions of his frustration, and the conversation had moved in the direction that conversations among resentful, drinking young men tend to move toward. Bold ideas that seem more reasonable than they are. The inflation of courage and the suppression of judgment. Toward someone eventually saying the thing that others had been approaching from multiple angles. Someone told him he should challenge Bruce Lee, that he was a real fighter, a real tough guy, that Kung Fu was fake, that Bruce was a Hollywood creation, and that proving this publicly would make Stallone famous. That was the logic. That was the plan that emerged from the conversation, and that the alcohol made sound not just plausible, but like the obvious move, the one clear path to the thing he had been unable to reach through any other means. "I'm going to do it," Stallone said, loud enough for the people around him to hear. "I'm going to call him out. I'm going to show everyone what's real and what's fake. I'm going to expose Bruce Lee as a fraud. Watch." His friends attempted to talk him down. The attempt failed. He was committed, and committed in the way that people are committed when alcohol has reduced the available mental space for second thoughts. He walked toward where Bruce was sitting. His footsteps loud. His bearing aggressive. People noticing and turning as he crossed the space between them. He reached Bruce and stood in front of him. Bruce looked up, not recognizing him, seeing a muscular young man standing too close with an energy that communicated that something unwelcome was about to happen. "Bruce Lee," Stallone said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, and they had already turned to look. "I'm Sylvester Stallone. I'm an actor. I'm a fighter. And I'm the real deal. Not a movie star pretending to be tough, but an actual tough guy. An actual fighter. An actual man who can back up what he says. And I'm calling you out right here, right now, in front of everyone. I challenge you to fight, to prove that your kung fu works against a real fighter, against real strength, against me. The warehouse quieted around them. People stopped training, stopped talking, stopped what they were doing, and turned toward the first row of chairs. The crowd understood what it was watching. A nobody had just publicly challenged Bruce Lee, and the particular kind of social gravity that such a moment generates had pulled 200 people's attention to a single point. Bruce stood up. He was calm in the way he was always calm in these situations, which was not the calm of someone suppressing a reaction, but the calm of someone who had processed the situation fully and was operating from that understanding. He looked at Stallone for a moment and saw what was there. A young man who was desperate and drunk and making a mistake he would not have made sober. "Listen," he said, his voice patient. "I don't know you. I don't know what you're trying to prove or why you think this is a good idea, but it isn't. You're making a mistake. A big one. A career mistake. You should walk away. Go home. Sleep this off. Tomorrow you'll understand how close you came to doing something genuinely damaging. Walk away. Save yourself and save your dignity while you can." Stallone did not walk away. He got louder. He said Bruce was scared, that he was afraid of getting exposed, or afraid of everyone seeing he was fake, just a movie star, just choreography, just camera tricks. He said Bruce would not fight him because he knew he would lose. Chuck Norris stood up and positioned himself between the two men. He told Stallone he was drunk and embarrassing himself and that walking away was the right choice. He said Bruce was being patient and generous and that mistaking either of those things for weakness or fear would be a serious error. Stallone pushed Chuck, not with significant force, but with the deliberate aggression of someone who has decided they are not going to be redirected by anyone. He said it did not concern Chuck, that this was between him and Bruce, between a real fighter and a movie star, between truth and lies. Bruce put his hand on Chuck's shoulder and told him it was okay. He looked at Stallone again, steadily. "What do you want? You want to fight me to prove something? To make yourself famous? Fine. But let's be clear. If you challenge me and I accept, and we test this, whatever happens, you accept. No excuses, no complaints. You challenged. You wanted this. You own the results. Agreed." Stallone agreed. He said 10 seconds was nothing, that he would dominate 10 seconds, that Bruce would be calling him master before it was over. Then Stallone said something else. He said he had studied Bruce, had watched him, learned his patterns, his movements, his techniques. And then he mentioned Bruce's family by name. He said he knew about them. He said he would exploit Bruce's vulnerabilities. He said Bruce had taken everything he wanted just by existing, just by being successful first, and that he intended to make Bruce pay for it. The crowd went quiet again, but this was a different silence. Mentioning an opponent's family, naming them, making them part of the confrontation, crossed a line that the earlier challenge had not crossed. This was not a drunk young man making a stupid challenge anymore. This was a threat that touched something Bruce protected entirely, without patience or negotiation. Bruce's expression changed. The patience left it. The cold that replaced it was not anger exactly. It was something more focused and more final, the look of someone who has identified a threat and is moving to eliminate it. "Okay," he said. His voice was quiet. "You want this? You get this. But you last 10 seconds and I'll call you master. I'll acknowledge you. I'll help your career. 10 seconds. Survive. Defend yourself. Stay in this and I'll give you what you're asking for. Accept it or shut up." Someone cleared a space. They moved to the boxing ring. People gathered around it. Bruce and Stallone climbed in and faced each other at center. Bruce centered and still. Stallone tense and overconfident. Chuck at ringside, watching with the concern of someone who had seen what Bruce could do and understood what was about to happen to this young man who had no idea what he was standing across from. The unofficial count began. 10 seconds, starting now. Stallone attacked immediately with no preamble, throwing a wide right hand, a full-power haymaker aimed at Bruce's head. The punch was telegraphed from the beginning. Too much wind-up, too much commitment too early. But the technique of someone whose fighting experience was not matched to the situation he had placed himself in. Bruce moved his head the minimum necessary distance. The punch passed his face and hit air. Stallone threw a left and then another right, a boxing combination, the thing he had trained, what he knew. Bruce slipped both with the same economy of movement, always somewhere other than where the punch arrived. Never in danger. Never looking like the incoming techniques were presenting him with any real problem to solve. 1 second. 2 seconds. Bruce's hand came forward, a straight punch, stopped an inch from Stallone's face. Controlled, pulled, not making contact, demonstrating the speed and the placement without the consequence, showing what was available without taking it. 3 seconds. Stallone tried to grab. He reached for Bruce's shoulders, trying to use the size advantage, trying to get his hands on Bruce and convert the exchange to something where his weight and strength could be factors. Bruce's hands came up and applied a trapping technique, controlling both of Stallone's wrists simultaneously. Specific grip, specific angle, specific leverage. Stallone's grip broke. His hands were trapped. He tried to pull back and could not. He stood there, held by a man who weighed 60 pounds less than he did. His strength entirely irrelevant. His size providing no advantage he could access. Every physical attribute he had counted on made unusable by the precision of the control being applied to him. Time, Chuck said from ringside. 10 seconds done. Bruce released him and stepped back. Stallone stumbled slightly as he was breathing hard, not from exertion, because the exchange had been brief, but from the specific physiological response to having your entire model of a situation prove catastrophically wrong in real time. He had expected to survive. He had expected his size and his boxing training and his strength to at least make this competitive. He had not expected to be completely controlled before he understood what was happening. 3 seconds of actual engagement. That was all it had taken. The crowd around the ring was silent in the particular way of people who received a result they expected but were unprepared for the manner of it. 3 seconds to complete control, not 10. 3. Bruce had not needed the full span of the challenge to make the point unmistakable. Stallone stood in the ring with the expression of someone who has had a comprehensive and immediate education in the distance between what they believed and what was true. He had called Bruce a fraud. He had said Kung Fu was fake. He had mentioned Bruce's family as a calculated provocation. And Bruce had just demonstrated, without injury and without excessive force, exactly how wrong all of that was. He had demonstrated it so efficiently that the remaining 7 seconds of the agreed-upon challenge had been irrelevant before the 3rd second was complete. "I'm sorry," Stallone said. His voice had changed. The alcohol-inflated aggression was entirely gone, replaced by something quieter and more honest. "I'm really sorry for everything. For the challenge, for disrespecting you, for mentioning your family, for being drunk, for being stupid, for being everything I was tonight. You're real. You're really real. Everything people say is true. I was wrong. Completely wrong." Bruce looked at him, not with the cold focus of a moment earlier, but with the specific expression of someone who has assessed a situation and found something worth responding to in it. He told Stallone he was talented, that he was physical and dedicated and willing to work, and that those things were real and important. But he also told him that tearing others down did not build you up, that making enemies did not create opportunities, that challenging legends did not make you a legend. It made you foolish. He told him to take the humiliation and use it as fuel, as motivation to train harder, to earn respect through demonstrated skill rather than through aggression and provocation. He told him to be the best version of himself, and not a poor man's anything. He extended his hand. Stallone took it and held it. The years that followed gave the story its fullest meaning. Stallone did not immediately transform, because people do not immediately transform, but the direction of his effort changed. He stopped drinking the way he had been drinking. He stopped looking for shortcuts through confrontation. He wrote Rocky, a story about a man who earned something through honest work and persistence, which had its own relationship to what he had learned that night in the warehouse. Rocky was made on a small budget and became one of the most commercially successful films of its era. Stallone became exactly what he had wanted to be, an action star, a household name, a person whose career sustained itself across decades because the foundation it was built on was real work rather than performed toughness. He talked about the warehouse later, after Bruce had died and after Stallone's own success was established, in the way that people talk about experiences that reorganized something fundamental. He said Bruce Lee had changed his life, not through inspiration or example in the distant sense, but through 3 seconds of direct physical contact that left him with no available interpretation except the true one. He said he had been drunk and desperate and arrogant and stupid, and that he had challenged Bruce Lee and threatened him and received 3 seconds of education that proved everything he had denied about the man was real. He said Bruce could have destroyed him, could have hurt him, could have humiliated him in ways that permanently damaged whatever career he might have had, could have justified doing much more than he chose to do. Instead, he trapped him, held him, made the point, and then released him, and offered advice. He said those 3 seconds had made him who he eventually became. Not because being physically dominated was itself instructive, but because of what Bruce did immediately after, the restraint, the release, the handshake, the words about becoming the best version of yourself rather than a diminished version of someone else. That was the lesson that stayed. That was what he carried. The account became part of the record that both men's careers generated. Bruce Lee's on one side, Stallone's on the other, with the 3 seconds at the warehouse in between. For people who cared about what Bruce Lee actually was, what his skills actually consisted of, whether what the films showed corresponded to any real underlying capability, Stallone's account was a specific and credible piece of testimony. He had not been a fan. He had not gone to the warehouse with any inclination to find Bruce Lee impressive. He had gone there specifically intending to challenge and expose him, and he had received 3 seconds that made that entire intention collapse into its opposite. The warehouse event itself left no formal record. There were no cameras, no press, and no documentation beyond the memories of the people who were there. The roughly 200 people who had come to see martial arts in a private setting had instead witnessed a 26-year-old actor challenge one of the most accomplished martial artists alive, and discover, in less time than it takes to draw a full breath, exactly how that challenge would resolve. What remained was the account that Stallone carried with him and eventually shared, specific in its detail, consistent across tellings, carrying the particular credibility of a story told by someone who did not come out of it looking good, who had no incentive to embellish his own foolishness, and who kept returning to it because it had genuinely mattered to him in ways that proved durable across decades. Bruce Lee died in July 1973, 5 months after the warehouse event, at 32. The films and the reputation and the influence he left behind have been the subject of sustained attention ever since, and the accounts collected from people who had direct encounters with him, the various challengers, the training partners, the colleagues, the people who came into his orbit with skepticism and left without it, form a body of evidence about what he was that no single account could establish alone. Stallone's account was one of those pieces. 3 seconds in a boxing ring at a private event in Los Angeles in February 1973 established a fact that Stallone spent the rest of his career honoring, that Bruce Lee was exactly what people said he was, exactly what the films showed him to be, and more than Stallone had thought to credit him for before the 3 seconds taught him differently. The lesson was not elegant. It was immediate and physical and humbling and conducted in front of an audience that would talk about it afterward. But Bruce Lee had turned it into something more than a demonstration. He had turned it, through what he chose to do after the 3 seconds ended, into an education, into the beginning of a different kind of career for a young man who had come to the warehouse with something to prove and left with something more valuable than whatever he had been trying to establish. He left with a clearer understanding of what actually mattered, delivered in a specific and irreversible way that only direct experience provides. That was the 3 seconds. That was the handshake afterward. That was the night Sylvester Stallone told Bruce Lee to stand 10 seconds against him, and Bruce used 3 seconds to prove everything, and then used the remaining 7, and the minutes after the clock stopped, to teach something that lasted considerably longer.